All right, so today let's take a deep dive into something pretty interesting, I think. We're going to be looking at the official portraits of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Oh, wow.
These pictures have been making a lot of noise online, and there's a good reason for that.
Yeah.
You see these portraits, they were not just like regular photographs, they're carefully crafted statements about how these figures want to be seen, particularly as leaders.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like a visual strategy. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Every detail from the lighting to the pose,
Right.
It's all meticulously chosen to project a certain image.
Okay, so let's put on our detective hats and break it down.
Okay.
When I first saw Trump's portrait, I was really struck by how intense he looks.
Yeah.
It's almost defiant. You get this strong sense of power from it, and maybe even a little bit of, I don't know if I should say this, but drama.
Well, it's definitely a powerful image.
Yeah.
And it aligns perfectly with the persona that Trump has cultivated throughout his career. It reminds me of how he presented himself in his business ventures on The Apprentice and, of course, during his presidency.
Right.
He's never shied away from projecting strength.
And that classic blue tie against the backdrop of the American flag.
Right.
It feels like a very deliberate choice to me.
Absolutely. The blue tie is like a staple of power dressing.
Yeah.
And combined with the flag, it reinforces this image of patriotism and leadership.
Yes.
It's a classic visual combination.
It is.
That resonates deeply with a certain segment of the American public.
And then you have J.D. Vance's portrait, which feels so much more approachable.
Yeah.
It's almost casual.
Yes, and that's where things get really interesting.
I know.
Notice how Vance is leaning slightly forward in his portrait.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but that posture combined with the softer lighting, it suggests that he's engaging directly with the viewer.
Right.
It breaks down that barrier between the subject and the observer, and it creates this sense of intimacy.
So we're seeing a contrast here.
Yeah.
Trump's portrait's all about projecting dominance,
Yeah.
while Vance is aiming for something more relatable.
Exactly. And that makes sense considering where each of them is in their political journeys.
Right.
Trump, a seasoned politician, is reinforcing his existing image.
Of course.
Vance, on the other hand, is a relative newcomer to the national stage.
Right.
He's still establishing his identity as a leader, and this portrait is a key part of that strategy.
It makes you wonder if Vance is consciously trying to differentiate himself from the more traditional image of Republican leadership.
That's a great question, and it's something worth considering.
Yeah.
By choosing a less formal, more man-of-the-people aesthetic,
Yeah.
Vance could be trying to appeal to a wider audience,
Right.
including those who might not typically identify with the Republican Party.
Speaking of history, I'm curious how these portraits compare to those of past presidents. I mean, these portraits are going to end up in history books, right?
Absolutely. They'll be studied and analyzed for generations to come. Now, when we look back at presidential portraits, you see a wide range of styles and approaches.
Yeah.
For instance, think about the official portrait of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Okay.
He's depicted sitting in his wheelchair,
Right.
a powerful symbol of his personal struggle and resilience.
Yeah.
It's a far cry from the more imposing, almost regal portraits of some earlier presidents.
So each portrait tells a story not just about the individual, but about the era they represent.
Exactly. Yeah. And in Trump's case, his portrait has a very distinct modern feel.
Uh-huh.
You could argue it's more akin to a high-end magazine cover
Oh, interesting.
than a traditional presidential portrait.
Yeah.
And that ties back to the idea of branding.
Right.
He's always been a master of creating a strong visual identity.
It's like he understands the power of image in a way that few politicians do.
Right. His rallies, his speeches, even his Twitter feed.
Right.
It's all carefully crafted to project a certain image and connect with a specific audience.
But let's not forget that a powerful photograph can make or break a politician. It's often the first impression voters have, and it can shape their perception in a really big way.
Absolutely. A well-crafted portrait can project leadership qualities, inspire trust, even create a sense of connection with voters.
Right.
It's a powerful tool for shaping public opinion.
And I've noticed that Vance's portrait, while less dramatic than Trump's, still conveys a sense of quiet confidence and determination.
You're right. Take a look at the way the light falls on his face.
Oh, wait.
It highlights his eyes, giving him a look of focused ambition.
Right.
It's subtle,
Yeah.
but it speaks to his desire to be taken seriously as a leader.
So even though these portraits have very different vibes,
Yes.
they both seem strategically designed to achieve a specific goal.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole analysis so fascinating.
I know.
We're not just looking at pictures.
Right.
We're decoding messages, understanding strategies, and getting a glimpse into how these figures want to be seen by the world.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion,
I like that analogy.
revealing all the complexities beneath the surface.
And the more we delve into the details, the more we understand the power of imagery in shaping our perceptions.
All right, so we've talked about first impressions and the power of photography,
Yeah.
but what about the public reaction? Have you seen what people are saying online?
Oh, it's been quite a whirlwind.
I bet.
The reactions are definitely mixed, especially with Trump's portrait.
Yeah, I can imagine. His portrait seems to be a lightning rod for both praise and criticism.
Exactly. His supporters see it as a powerful statement of resilience, a testament to his unwavering spirit. But critics view it as overly staged and dramatic,
Yeah.
further evidence of his ego and showmanship.
And what about Vance's portrait?
Yeah.
Has it generated as much controversy?
Interestingly, no.
Yeah.
The reactions to Vance's portrait have been more muted.
Okay.
Some find it refreshing, praising its approachability and authenticity.
Yeah.
Others see it as calculated and a bit too polished, perhaps lacking in genuine warmth.
It's fascinating how two portraits released at roughly the same time can elicit such different responses.
And that's what makes this whole topic so intriguing.
Yeah.
It's not just about the technical aspects of photography. It's
Sure.
about understanding how images are interpreted, how they evoke emotions, and how they ultimately shape our perceptions of the people they depict.
It's like we're all participating in this giant visual conversation,
Yeah,
interpreting these portraits through our own lenses of experience and belief.
exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the messages being conveyed through these images, to analyze them critically,
Yeah.
and to form our own informed opinions.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much to unpack. Let's delve into the symbolism and strategy behind these portraits after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper. I think we've talked about the overall impressions these portraits make.
Right.
But I'm curious about the specific choices made in each one. It's
Yeah.
like each detail is a clue, and we're trying to solve a visual mystery.
I love that.
Right.
And you're right. Every element from the lighting to the background,
Right.
it all plays a role in shaping the message.
Yeah.
So let's start with Trump's portrait.
Okay.
The dark lighting, the intense gaze, the prominent American flag.
Yeah.
It all creates this aura of power and authority,
It does.
almost like a classic movie poster for a political thriller.
And the flag is interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's not just there as decoration.
Right.
It's a deliberate choice to reinforce his patriotism and connect with a specific audience.
Exactly. And that ties back to what we were discussing earlier about branding.
Right.
The flag becomes a visual shorthand for a set of values and beliefs that resonate with his base. It's a powerful symbol that evokes strong emotions.
Now let's contrast that with Vance's portrait.
Okay.
It's much brighter, and he's not staring directly at the camera.
Right.
It feels more casual, more intimate even.
Right. And remember what we said about the way he's leaning forward.
Yes.
That's a key element here.
Okay.
It's almost as if he's inviting you into a conversation rather than projecting an image from a distance.
Oh. And the choice of a lighter background and softer lighting,
Yeah.
that reinforces that sense of approachability.
It's interesting because he's still dressed formally,
Yeah.
but the overall feeling is much less imposing than Trump's portrait.
Right.
It's like he's trying to strike a balance between authority and relatability.
Precisely. He's not rejecting traditional notions of leadership,
Right.
but he's presenting them in a way that feels more modern, more accessible.
This makes me think about something you mentioned earlier about how these portraits will be viewed by future generations.
Yeah.
Do you think they'll be seen as typical representations of political figures in the early 21st century?
That's a great question, and it's hard to say for sure,
Sure.
but I think they offer a fascinating snapshot of a particular moment in American political history. Trump's portrait, with its dramatic lighting and strong visual cues,
Yeah.
speaks to a certain style of leadership that's very much associated with his era,
Right.
and Vance's portrait, with its more approachable aesthetic,
Yeah. Might reflect a shift towards a more relatable, less formal style of leadership that's emerging.
it's like we're witnessing a changing of the guard.
Right.
And these portraits capture that transition in a very visual way.
Right. And it's a reminder that these images aren't just about aesthetics.
Right.
They're about power perception.
Yeah.
and the ways in which leaders choose to present themselves to the world.
Okay, so we've dissected the symbolism and the strategies behind these portraits.
We have.
But what does it all mean?
Right.
How do these images fit into the bigger picture of their political careers?
Well, let's start with Trump.
Okay.
His portrait, with its bold imagery and unapologetic message,
Yeah.
is a clear signal to his base that he's still a force to be reckoned with. It's a reminder of his presence, his power, and his unwavering commitment to his core beliefs.
It's almost like he's saying, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and don't you forget it.
Exactly. And for someone who's constantly in the spotlight, facing criticism and scrutiny,
Right.
this portrait is a way of controlling the narrative and projecting an image of strength and defiance.
And what about Vance?
Yeah.
How does his portrait play into his political ambitions?
For Vance, this portrait is about establishing himself as a leader for the future.
Okay.
He's positioning himself as someone who understands the concerns of everyday people, someone who's approachable and relatable.
Right.
It's a way of building trust and connecting with a wider audience.
So it's less about clinging to the past and more about charting a new course.
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
His portrait is a carefully crafted introduction to a national audience. A way of saying, I'm here, I'm ready to lead, and I'm someone you can trust.
And isn't it interesting how these portraits, even though they're static images,
Yeah.
can actually tell us so much about where these figures are headed?
Yeah.
It's like they're roadmaps for their political journeys.
Absolutely. They're visual declarations of intent,
Right.
outlining their visions for the future and the roles they see themselves playing on the national stage.
Now, all of this talk about strategy and messaging makes me wonder,
Yeah.
what about the average person?
Right.
How can we be more aware of these visual tactics and avoid being manipulated by them?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And it's something we should all be thinking about.
Yeah.
We live in a world where we're bombarded with images every day,
Right.
and it's easy to passively consume them without really thinking about the messages they're conveying.
So what can we do? Should we all become visual detectives scrutinizing every picture we see?
I wouldn't say we need to overanalyze everything,
Okay.
but it's important to develop a critical eye.
Right.
Start by asking yourself some basic questions.
Okay, like what?
Who created this image?
Yeah.
What's their purpose? What message are they trying to convey?
Right.
And most importantly, how does this image make me feel?
Those are great questions. It's like we need to train ourselves to see beyond the surface
Right.
and understand the deeper meaning behind the images we encounter.
Exactly. And once you start doing that, you'll be amazed at how much more you notice about the world around you.
I bet.
You become more aware of the subtle ways in which images are used to influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions.
It's almost like we're living in a giant visual puzzle.
Yeah.
And the more pieces we can put together,
Right.
the better we can understand the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And the more we understand the power of imagery,
Uh-huh.
the more empowered we become as individuals.
Right.
We can choose which messages we want to absorb, which narratives we want to believe, and which images we want to shape our own worldviews.
So we've talked about strategy, symbolism, and even a bit of psychology. But I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the historical context of these portraits.
Okay.
How do they compare to the portraits of past presidents and politicians?
That's a fascinating question,
It is.
and one that can take up an entire episode on its own.
I know, right?
But I think it's safe to say that these portraits are a reflection of our current moment in time.
Yeah.
A time where image and branding play a more prominent role than ever before.
Right. And technology has a lot to do with that, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
With the rise of social media and the 24-hour news cycle,
Right.
politicians are constantly under scrutiny,
Uh-huh.
and their images are being disseminated and analyzed like never before.
Absolutely. And that's why these portraits are so significant.
Right.
They're not just static images.
Right.
They're dynamic tools that can be used to shape public perception, control the narrative, and ultimately influence the course of events.
So they're more than just art.
Yeah.
They're weapons in the arsenal of political warfare.
I wouldn't go that far,
Okay.
but they certainly play a significant role in the battle for hearts and minds.
Right.
And in a world where information is constantly being weaponized,
Yeah.
it's more important than ever to be aware of the messages we're consuming and the ways in which they're being used to influence us.
Well said.
Right.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask you one final question. We've talked about how these portraits reflect the individuals they depict and the era they represent.
Right.
But what do they tell us about ourselves, the viewers?
That's a powerful question,
It is.
and one that deserves careful consideration.
Yeah.
I think these portraits and the reactions they've provoked offer a fascinating glimpse into our own biases, our own perceptions, and our own understandings of leadership and power.
So it's not just about what these images say about Trump and Vance,
Right.
but what they reveal about us as individuals and as a society.
Exactly. They're mirrors reflecting our own values, our own anxieties, and our own hopes for the future.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
by analyzing these reflections,
Yeah.
we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world we live in.
Yeah. That's a lot to ponder.
It is.
Yeah, it feels like we've really gone on this journey, you know?
It does.
From just looking at these portraits to actually understanding all the thought and strategy behind them.
Right.
It's amazing how much one single image can really tell us.
It is remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think what's so intriguing is that the conversation doesn't even end here.
Right.
These portraits will continue to be interpreted and reinterpreted as time goes on, and their meanings may even evolve as our understanding of these figures and their legacies changes.
So these portraits aren't even just about Trump and Vance. It's about us, the viewers, and how we engage with these images.
Absolutely.
They're a reflection of our times and our perceptions.
Precisely. And that's what makes studying visual culture so fascinating.
I know.
It's not just about aesthetics or artistic technique. It's about understanding the power of images to really shape our understanding of the world.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listener with something to think about.
Okay.
We've been analyzing these official portraits.
Right.
But everyone creates their own portraits every day.
Yeah.
Whether it's choosing a profile picture or curating a social media feed or even just deciding what to wear,
Right.
we're all constantly crafting these visual narratives about ourselves,
That's a brilliant point.
right?
And just like with these official portraits, the choices we make in our everyday lives, they send messages about who we are, what we value, and how we want to be perceived.
Right.
So the next time you're putting together an outfit or snapping a selfie, think about the story you're trying to tell.
It's like we're all artists in a way, using these visual cues to express ourselves and connect with others.
And just like any form of communication,
Yeah.
it's important to be mindful of the messages we're sending and the impact they might have.
Right.
Because in a world that's increasingly visual, the way we present ourselves can have a huge effect on how we're perceived and the opportunities that come our way.
Well, I think we've given our listener a lot to think about today.
We have.
We've explored the symbolism, the strategy, and the historical context behind these portraits.
Right.
And we even touched on the psychology of visual perception.
Yeah.
It's been a really fascinating depth dive.
It has been a pleasure joining you on this exploration.
Of course.
And I really hope our listener will continue to engage with these images and the broader conversation about the power of visual culture.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
My pleasure.
Remember, the world is full of fascinating images just waiting to be decoded. Keep those eyes open, stay curious, and until next time, keep on diving.